It's just kind of a city where you take a seat, you relax, you take in the view, you don't rush, and you just enjoy. And when you take that kind of approach to Paris, that's when Paris really unveils itself to you.
Hey, financially savvy travelers, welcome back to another episode of the Thought Card podcast. Today's episode is an absolute treat and delight. I'm joined by Renee Hannes, who is sharing how to slow travel in Paris. As we know, Paris is one of the most visited cities in the world, but you don't have to rush your experience. It doesn't have to be a stressful planning experience either. So we absolutely cover what slow travel really means and how you can apply that to your Paris trip, as well as the best neighborhoods to stay in Paris and why, the cultural experiences that really help you immerse yourself in the Parisian way of life, and so much more. So Renee Hannes is a travel writer, a content creator, and the founder of Dream Plan Experience, where she shares her passion for slow, immersive cultural travel. After a 25-year career as a corporate HR executive, Renee followed her love for storytelling, photography, and Europe, creating resources to help travelers experience the continent beyond the guidebooks. She now runs her travel website and offers bespoke travel consulting services, inspiring others to travel deeper and experience more. You can connect with Renee over at dreamplanexperience.com. And she mentions this in the episode that she has a travel guide, the ultimate Paris guide, that I highly recommend you grabbing because there's just so much information about the landmarks and cultural insights, lots of things that you may want to incorporate in your own Paris travel planning. So definitely recommend grabbing this resource afterwards. Head over to the episode description. All the links mentioned will be there. Welcome to The Thought Card, a podcast about travel and money, where planning, saving, and creativity leads to affording travel, building wealth, and paying off debt. We are the financially savvy travelers. I'd love to hear what drew you to Paris initially. And you've been, I believe, over 11 times. Maybe you have something coming up soon to make it 12, but what keeps you coming back to Paris over and over and over again?
Well, I've been traveling to Europe for over 35 years. And so when I first went to Paris, it was actually to plan my husband and I's 15th wedding anniversary. And we decided to go to the city, not having been there before, just because, like everybody, they dream of going to Paris, and it's the most romantic city and considered in the world. And so I thought it would be a good way to celebrate our 15th wedding anniversary, but had been to Europe many times before that. And it did not take us long to immediately fall in love with the city. And we were there for 4 nights, and we were just so sad to leave it. And it was the last night. We were having a dinner late at night, and then we took a walk along the Seine and stopped at the bridge. We both just kind of, were thinking the same thing of how quickly can we come back here? And we said, how about we make a pact that every 5 years we come and we celebrate our next 5-year anniversary. And so we've been doing that, and next year marks our 30th wedding anniversary. And so again, we'll be back to Paris. So beyond the every 5 years celebrating our anniversary in Paris, we've been back 11 times. Many of those times I've gone solo, but other times my husband has joined me. And every time we go back to the city, it feels like returning home. It's just that kind of feeling with that city. And it's just a place that we both daydream about, that we would love to live there one day.
So relatable. Absolutely so relatable. Just like the thought of going back to Paris for me, it just like brings happy, warm croissant, buttery croissant feelings. So, but I also really appreciated that you mentioned how you created a tradition, a family tradition for you and your husband, where every 5 years you're going back. Because I think a lot of people, they're constantly looking for what's next, what's new, like going to new places. But there's something to be said about when you find a place that you really connect to, going back over and over and over again. And I'm sure every trip you discover something different, something new, So can you speak to that of returning back and why that's so important? Because I'm sure during those 11 trips, you could have gone to other places in Europe or across the world.
Yeah, for sure. It resonates with me about returning to places over and over again. And part of that is because I really practice that kind of philosophy of slow travel, which is I travel more deeply than broadly. So I've been traveling to Europe for 35 years, and you would think that I would have a high number of countries or places that I've been to, but the reality is I probably have a much lower number than most travelers. And the reason why is because I do like to return over and over again. And it's because when I'm there, I really want to live and breathe the city. I don't like to kind of rush and go and, check off everything off my list and feel like, okay, I've seen the city in 3 days or 4 days because I've gone, nonstop from site to site to site. And so I've really kind of embraced the attitude of I'm going to enjoy what I can enjoy in the amount of time that I have, and I'll just return. I'll return again. And that's what I say every time when I go to a place that I absolutely love and adore. I'll just say to myself, I'll return again. And so there's not this kind of pang of, oh, I didn't see this and I missed out on this. If I really do want to return, I do. And Paris is one of those places that, again, 11 trips I've been to that I still see when I go and return. There are repeat things that I love to do every time, like kind of my little traditions. But then there's always new things to see. There's always new neighborhoods to explore. It's just such a fantastic city that you can be going. And like yourself, I first went in 2014. So it's been, that almost that long period of time that you've been going, and the city changes and there's new restaurants to try, and maybe new exhibits that are popping up in museums. So it's a city that I think that you can, if you really do enjoy it, it's one of those cities that keeps you coming back. And there's so much more that you can see and do. And I really love when I'm there that I kind of take the approach of it's just kind of the city where you take a seat, you relax, you take in the view, you don't rush, and you just enjoy. And when you take that kind of approach to Paris, that's when Paris really unveils itself to you. I know that there's some people who go to Paris and they just don't get it. They don't understand the hype. They don't understand, why people love the city so much. And I think perhaps part of that is because they are only going to that city and rushing through, the top landmarks that you need to see. And you're only going to the touristy places. But Paris is such a city that is living and breathing with Parisians that you can really feel like you're a local when you kind of take their approach to how they view life and how they view their day, which is they've really kind of mastered that slow living approach to their day to day.
I so appreciate that. I'm definitely going to dive into slow travel with you because I have lots of questions about what that looks like in Paris. I also want to just kind of hammer on the point that, like, for example, my husband and I are going to Europe his first time. And I told him, hey, listen, like next year, like I want to have you have the best time. So where would you like to go? And he rattled off like three cities that are quite literally like on the opposite sides. Like they're not, I mean, we know that Europe is very interconnected and it's easy to get to. You can hop on a plane, blah, blah, blah. We know that. But I really was stressing, let's slow down. Like, let's just spend 10 days here. Afterwards, like we could come back and have another experience. But I do definitely feel like a lot of people, especially in the US, like we have limited vacation time. So we're constantly just trying to put a travel plan together and see as much as possible. And I think I'd love to counteract that with the slow travel conversation. So on your website, Dream Plan Experience, you have this beautiful quote. And I'd love for you to expand upon that and highlight exactly what you mean by this. So you said slow travel in Paris is more than just a leisurely way to explore the city. It's about embracing a mindset that allows you to connect deeply with the culture and rhythm of life here. So how can we balance, okay, we are here in Paris, we want to sightsee, but we also want to have that slow down. We want to have like that in deep enjoyment. How do we find that in between spot where we feel fulfilled on both sides?
It's about balance. And so, when you're not traveling with another person, you can obviously choose how you spend your time. But if you're going as a couple or if you're going as a family, you have different people in that travel party that you want to make sure, everybody's enjoying that trip, and people have a different, way or approach to how they want to see that city. So I think it's striking that balance. And maybe it's just saying, in each day, what are the one or two landmarks that we want to see today? And then you're balancing it off with, then there's, planned but unplanned time where you just get to go around the city or explore a neighborhood. And the reason why I say that kind of Paris is meant to really be explored slowly is because, and I think it's like any city that you go to in Europe, if you just go to see the landmarks, so in Paris, if you're just going to go to the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre and Notre Dame, you're going to be surrounded by all other tourists. And you're going in, you're seeing it, and then you're going on to the next one. And if you do that day after day after day, and you're in Europe for 10 days, you're kind of going to go back to work and you're going to feel like all those sites just blur together. You kind of miss the point of being able to go and enjoy one for an hour and understand it and maybe read about it, or maybe take a tour and understand the history of it. And then let that stay in present mind so that you're not kind of thinking about what's the next thing that I need to rush off and go and do. So it's really just kind of creating that balance. And you can do it by, maybe saying, here's one thing that we're going to do in the morning, and maybe here's one thing that we're going to do in the afternoon. And your goal is to walk from that one landmark to the other landmark without any plans. And so that way you're able to kind of mix, hey, I've checked two things off my list, if that's your approach. But I also got to explore because I walked through the city and I popped into this church because it just looked really interesting. And I saw, the frescoes on the ceiling. Maybe I stopped at a cafe and I spent a couple of hours, and then I, walked through a park instead of maybe on a busy street. So it's kind of, it's the journey between the two destinations that you maybe want to look at in that day. That's how you explore and see a city. That's how you kind of experience the city, because you're doing it through maybe in an unhurried way, but you're also putting in lots of time in between those times that you get to be able to just let your feet be your guide and, let whatever your curiosity kind of strikes for you. The beauty about slow travel is that it's not just about being slow footed. It's about, what is it that really speaks to you? What do you really enjoy doing? And so you prioritize those. And if you really love museums, you could go to Paris and you could spend days upon days just going from one museum to the next. And that way, you're choosing how you spend your time. That's the quality of and the value that you're putting into, because that's something that you really value. If you're coming to the city and you feel that pressure of, going up the Eiffel Tower or going into the Louvre because someone says you've got to go and see the Mona Lisa, or you feel the social media pressure to go and see the Mona Lisa, but you're not really into museums, you're going to leave the Louvre and you're going to miss the point entirely. you're going to be, underwhelmed by it because you're going to be surrounded by crowds. You're going to realize you get up to it and you see how small it is on that big wall, and you're surrounded by people, and you just won't appreciate it. But if you enjoy museums, then that's something that you don't mind standing in line for a couple of hours because you really appreciate the beauty of museums and you love, the art that's within those museums. And so that part of that slow travel mindset is that it's not just about the pace of your trip or that you have to spend 10 days in one location. You can practice that kind of philosophy of slow travel even within a day in a city, in a busy city like Paris or Rome or wherever. And you could only be there for a couple of days, but it's just choosing and being unapologetically about what you really value about your interests. And then, letting your itinerary kind of dictate that.
So many things to unpack here. So many. First, I want to start with it is very true. So, my most recent trip to Paris, I believe, was 2 years ago with my mom and my baby. I think he was 2 at the time. And that was a completely different experience than the last 2 times where I was either going solo or with like my young cousins, which was very different, more party, more, more
Yeah.
rah rah, that kind of trip. And we decided that we were going to walk everywhere because of the fact that going up and down in the metro with a stroller was not ideal for us. So we were like, we have our walking shoes and we walked so many steps a day. And I really felt like all of us got a chance to really see the city. And every day we explored, like you mentioned, we went from one landmark to another landmark slowly, and we could stop in and take pictures and really just be just immersed. So I can definitely speak to the fact of, okay, Paris is a walkable city and there's a lot that you can see and do and experience by just simply walking from one landmark. Even if it feels far, I'm telling you, it will go by so much faster than you think.
I think so too, because I really feel like the beauty of Paris is found in the streets, and it's found in the people, like the Parisians, the everyday. That's where I feel there's the most amount of beauty is just kind of walking through one of their squares or one of their parks, down their little side streets. And whether you're looking at one of the ones that are ancient and they're untouched, or the ones that were then renovated because of housemen and that typical Parisian style. That's where the beauty is, in just those simple things of walking behind a Parisian and just watching them stop at a window and, taking the moment to see kind of even the windows, that the displays that they put in most of the shops are just, there's something to not just rush by and not look at. They're really meant to kind of stop and look and pause and be curious about and think, is that a store that I'd love to go into? But they even make their window displays so enticing for people to walk slowly past them.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking back to like my mom's first time again, like I mentioned, me, mom, and baby. It was so remarkable to see how she eased. She was so calm and she kind of fell in lockstep with like the vibe of, again, like you mentioned, being a flaneur and just relaxed pace, unharried pace, right? So, but I think again, it's knowing this, right? If you're planning your trip to Paris and you're kind of like listening to this episode, for example, and you're just like, let me just be a little bit more observant. Let me just be a little bit more intentional. Let me do these simple things, these simple planning things. You will definitely fall in step, like we mentioned, definitely. And then another thing I wanted to talk about also is how you talked about you are spending your time based on values. And on the personal finance side, a lot of times I talk about value based spending, meaning that we're spending money on the things that we value. But I love on the slow travel side how you're saying, hey, you're spending your time doing the things that you value. It goes beyond just like the money spent, but also the time spent as well. So I think these are things that big takeaways for me personally.
Absolutely. I think, everybody goes to Paris and they think that they need to go up the Eiffel Tower. And I always say, for the first time you go to Paris, decide whether you want to go up the Eiffel Tower and see the city, or whether you want to see the city with the view of the Eiffel Tower. Because, that's a cost that you need to determine, right? It's a cost of time, but it's also a cost of an entrance ticket, because you have to pre-book that before you go. You can't just show up at the Eiffel Tower and take a ticket and go up. You have to pre-book that, and it can be pricey. So there's lots of ways to be able to be in the city and see the Eiffel Tower, and you can do it for free. And the same thing for the Louvre. There's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, museums are not interesting to me, and I don't think I'll value that from a time perspective. Again, it's a cost of an entrance ticket, but you may want to go to the Louvre because it's incredible architecture, and go in the day where you can see and you can walk around there and you can see the glass pyramid and take your photo in front of the fountains and walk through the arcades. And then you can kind of, move over right to the side of it and walk through the Jardin des Tuileries, which is the beautiful garden right beside the Louvre. And then you can return at night, and it looks completely different with the lights and, the ambiance of it. And so there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I went to the Louvre, but I just didn't go inside and, spend a couple of hours amongst the crowds, walking through and going through paintings that really, I don't have the historical context, so it doesn't have a lot of meaning for me. So those are two things that I think are, people feel the pressure as first time visitors to Paris, and they can ask themselves those questions of, you can go to these sites, whether you go inside or not and spend that money is another story, is another kind of step in your trip planning.
Absolutely. Me personally, 3 times, I have not been to the Louvre yet. Have walked around, have seen the exterior, but haven't been quite yet. And again, like we mentioned, every time you visit, you get a chance to do something different, something else. So potentially in my 4th trip or 5th trip, maybe I'll add that to the list. But so far, I'm totally content with not having that experience so far. Right? We have to plan our vacations our way, right? And I think it's easy for us to get caught up in social media and like all of the hype, but at the end of the day, we have to plan our trips the way we want to spend our time. So, I think this is a great opportunity for us to talk about nitty-gritty logistics. Now that we have a great framing, would love to chat about neighborhoods because there's a lot of talk out there about how important it is to pick the right neighborhood, or arrondissement in French. So, what are your thoughts on your favorite neighborhoods to stay in, and why are those your top picks?
I think it depends on if you're returning to the city or if you're coming to the city for the first time. Because I think that there is potentially a difference in how I respond to that. I think that many people think of the Paris and they think that they need to be in Montmartre. And Montmartre is in the 18th arrondissement. And sits up high up on the hill. And that's the kind of romantic Paris that people have a vision in their mind. You can see the Eiffel Tower from there. It's where the Sacre Coeur is. It's where the artists used to go and still go and, kind of paint scenes of Paris or paint your portraits. And it's just a kind of quintessential Paris that we all think of. And I know a lot of first timers think, I want to stay there. But I actually don't recommend staying there. And the reason for it is because you're in the 18th arrondissement. And how the city is set up is that you have the Seine, which is the river in the middle, and you have the right bank and the left bank. And just as you said, you have the arrondissements, which are the neighborhoods that spiral like a snail's tail out from the Seine. And they go from 1 to 20. So if you think about Montmartre being 18, it is very much removed from the city center. And so if you've never been to Paris before and you put yourself up into the 18th arrondissement, you are going to be taking either the metro or you're going to be walking down to central Paris to see what we all probably come to Paris to go and see. I recommend that you stay in central Paris, which would be the arrondissements close to the Seine. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Those would be the ones that I would say are most essential for first time visitors to Paris. And it means that you're doing less walking and you're in that kind of central Paris that we all have seen in movies, TV, and on social media and on photos. And making it central means that you are spending more time there and less time kind of walking or less time being underground and being in the metro. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you want to be able to be easily accessible to some of the main sites there. So I think from a budget perspective, the fifth is a great option for travelers. It's also known as the Latin Quarter. And the Latin Quarter it's very lively. It's close to the sun. There's some great restaurants there. It's affordable because the university is there. So yes, you're surrounded by some students and student living, but it's kind of got a great vibe to the city. Restaurants, cafes there, and it's central. A lot of people love the Marais, which is the third and fourth arrondissement. I would choose the third, which is the lower part of Moray, again, getting you closer to the Seine. And the reason why people love the Marais is because it's the old part of Paris. A lot of it wasn't renovated with the Haussmann coming in and doing the Haussmann architecture. So a lot of it is, it predates that, so 16th, 17th century. There's some great restaurants there. There's some really good smaller free museums that are there. It's great for shopping, great little streets, pop-up galleries and boutiques. It's a great kind of vibe of the city. And then the other one that's very popular is Saint-Germain. And Saint-Germain is part of the sixth arrondissement. And it's kind of the chic part, one of the chic parts of Paris, I should say. And it's famous for their coffee houses or their cafes. So that's where it's on the left bank. And so it's where, all of the political and literary people came and, debated about life and talked about politics and what was going on in these kind of cafes. And so they're famous for that in that kind of historical context. It's a great part of the city. There's lots of great shopping and restaurants, and it's got a great kind of neighborhood vibe to it, and it's very close to the Seine. The other area that I think most people gravitate to is they think that they need to be near the Eiffel Tower, that they want to stay in a little pied de terre and have a view of the Eiffel Tower. And the reality is that you can be in many parts of the city and have a view of the Eiffel Tower. You don't necessarily need to be near the Eiffel Tower. For first-time visitors, I wouldn't recommend staying near there because the Eiffel Tower is actually, it's in the 7th arrondissement, but it's a little bit farther from the main part of Paris where you're going to be wanting to spend more time. Although you might be near the Eiffel Tower, you're not necessarily near some of the other sites. So again, just like Montmartre, I would say, it's a great place to go and have your visit, but don't necessarily stay there because every day you're then going to either have to get on the metro or you're going to have a long walk to kind of bring yourself more closer to central Paris.
Amazing. This is so detailed. You have like the pros and cons of each of them. And you gave such a wealth of just options to choose from, right? There's many neighborhoods. And thank you so much for that. And I'm taking my own personal notes so I can explore different areas for my next visit. So I absolutely love that. I know that listeners may also be thinking about best time of year. Is there really a best time of year, or is it more of each time of year offers something unique and different for visitors?
You've said it best, Danielle, that like I personally think you could go anytime in Paris and have a wonderful time, and there's a different way to kind of see the cities through the seasons. Unfortunately, I know most people go to the city during the summer months because, that's when they can take vacation time. That's when they maybe can go with their families because of not pulling their kids out of school. And I totally understand that. But to visit in July and August is probably the worst time to go to Paris. And there's a few reasons why. One, it's very crowded, obviously, but it's also hot, and Paris doesn't have a lot of air conditioning. For North Americans, that could be a little bit shocking that you will be in the city with lots of crowds and in the heat of the summer with no air conditioning. It doesn't make just, a kind of a pleasant trip. If you were to go in the summer months because it's absolutely, you have to because of family reasons, I would go towards the end of June, early July, before Baptiste Day, which is their 4th of July kind of celebrations, July 14th. So I would go before then, and I would not go in August. And the reason why is because Parisians get about 5 to 6 weeks vacation and they leave the city. And so many of the small, chef run restaurants, many of the, little boutiques, you'll see a close sign on their door and it will be that they're closed, that they're not open. And so when you're there in August, you're not spending the city with locals, you're seeing the city with tourists. And so it's just a different experience. But when you should go, and if you could have the flexibility of planning any time, I think that there's 3 seasons that you want to focus on. One is during cherry blossom season. So Paris is absolutely beautiful in the springtime. The cliche of Paris in the springtime, it is true because in late March into very early April, the city is under pink blossoms, the cherry blossoms. And they're not only in the parks, they line the streets and it just looks absolutely beautiful. And so if you can, springtime in Paris is a time that I would recommend to go, as well as in the fall. And I really love going in late fall, which would probably be mid-October into early November. All the linden trees that you see lining the streets and lining the sun, they turn this golden yellow and it just looks so beautiful. And when the leaves start to drop on the streets and and walking on the cobblestones and they crunch underfoot, and you go into a cafe and they have the heaters under their awnings and they give you a blanket and they start to serve very warm, robust kind of dishes. It's just absolutely cozy and everything that you would want from kind of an autumn or a fall vacation. And the last time or season that I think that I would recommend is just before Christmas. And the reason for that is because they're not famous for their Christmas markets. I would say that if you've been to Europe and you've been to, Germany or Austria and you've seen those Christmas markets, you'll be a little bit underwhelmed by Paris's Christmas markets. But what they do is they turn the city into this beautiful window display. And, even every single window in Paris, creates kind of a holiday or a very beautiful kind of windowscape that you can look at. The lights that they string on the trees are just absolutely beautiful. And then also the famous designers of Dior and Chanel and Givenchy, their storefronts are absolutely stunning. It's like they have a competition. They're trying to compete against one another in terms of creating these elaborate window displays and window features on their designer shops. And so it's just such a beautiful time to go, just because it's just so magical. It's so pretty under all those lights. I've been twice for that kind of Christmas time, late November into early December, because I love it then. It really does get you into that festive season.
Oh my gosh, you are painting such a beautiful picture that I must see. Now Paris is back on my list again for 2026. So absolutely a beautiful. We typically have gone in the springtime, typically May, early June sometimes, which I absolutely love, but I miss the cherry blossom season. So this definitely puts like another experience on my wish list. So I really, really appreciate that. Renee, I'd love for you to talk to us a bit about your Paris Guide because you have put together a fantastic resource that we don't have time to talk about every single attraction and everything that must be done while in Paris. So I'd love for folks to hear what you have to say about your guide and connect them to that resource.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So I wrote an ebook about experiencing Paris, the joy of slow travel. And it's really just my kind of personal love letter to the city. And I just share little tips about how to embrace slow travel, how to start to practice it, and how to start to introduce it into your way of approach for your next trip, whether it's to Paris or beyond. And then also, I provide 67 little local places that Parisians love that you won't necessarily find in every guidebook. So these are, smaller museums, they're, little hidden away courtyards or gardens. There's also, a little bit of the history of Paris. So it kind of connects you with understanding the reason why Parisians are the way that they are. It's rooted in their history and how they find beauty in the everyday. That's an ebook that is really, I view as kind of my love letter to Paris, with sharing some insider tips that I've picked up in terms of exploring the city over those 11 trips that I've made. And then I just have a robust guide that is a separate guide that people can purchase before they're going, and it gives you recommendations of restaurants and cafes, and it pinpoints where they are in the city, a little bit about the history, where to stay in the city, just more of the logistics of approaching the city.
Yes, absolutely. I really appreciate that because, like I mentioned, we could spend another hour just talking about like attractions and landmarks and restaurants. So, the best next step for listeners is to pick up Renee's Paris Guide. But I do want to leave listeners with two things. So, the first thing, I want to talk a bit about the cultural experiences that are unique to Paris because, like we mentioned, like sightseeing and landmarks are key and are important. But I do think that perhaps it's like the baking class or going to a winery, for example, or there's a lot of things I feel like we miss out when we're not thinking about cultural experiences. So, can you speak briefly about the cultural experiences that we may want to add to our list?
Yeah, I think some cultural experiences that are maybe not unique to Paris, but certainly are things that do kind of lend themselves to Paris. There's a great chocolate tasting, chocolate eating tour that goes through Saint Germain. The French really love to kind of have small bites of delicious, decadent chocolate things. And so they go through the beauty of how to make chocolate, the purity of it, and then actually showing it how you can, make it into a truffle or, your little kind of dessert that you see it in. So I think that would be a great cultural experience. It's part walking tour, but it's also doing it through the lens of chocolate. The other one that I've really enjoyed is eating with a local. So you go to a Parisian's home, and they're not a chef or anything like that, but they treat you to an evening as if you were their friend coming over for a dinner. And it's a great way to immerse yourself into seeing how someone lives into their apartment, their small little pied de terre. They prepare a meal for you, whether it's their favorite or something that's kind of traditional to Paris. So depending on the season that you're going in, that dinner probably changes because they're very much about a proponent of going to a market and cooking what's in season. But then you also get to talk with a Parisian and, find out about what they like to do, just in their day to day. What does a day look like in the Parisian? Where do they recommend that you go? You get to hear about their views in terms of they love to talk about politics and history and art. And so it's a great chance for you to kind of pick up on how they would have a conversation at a dinner party. And you're doing this with sometimes other tourists, or you're doing this perhaps with couples that are, from different places around the world. And so it's just a great evening or a great way to immerse yourself into the culture. I think another thing too that you could take advantage of are free walking tours in the city. And I did one through Père Lachaise Cemetery. And I know that it's one thing that people often like to go and do is walk through that cemetery. And it's great to be able to do that. And if you know that you want to go and see this, for example, Jim Morrison's gravesite. But what you're missing is the context behind that and the stories about it. And it's a great way to hear from a local guide, and they can tell you about the history of that person who has been placed as their grave in that cemetery, one of the most famous cemeteries in Paris, and why they're famous and why they were chosen there. But then they tell the stories around it and how that kind of connects with, picking up on a few tidbits about the history, the culture of Paris, the city, and maybe, through the timeline of history. So it's a great way to, again, immerse yourself culturally through a local guide, and it could be a free walking tour. And I just happened to choose Père Lachaise Cemetery because it's a great one, because you hear the history of Paris. You see those famous people who have been there that are buried there, and then hear about their connection to the city and the role that they played in Paris's history.
Incredible. And I love how you sprinkled in a variety of just like price points as well, keeping that financially savvy travel spirit in mind. So I really, really appreciate that. Okay. So my last and final question, because I know we're getting over here, but my last question for you is, if you had to plan your special day in Paris with the slow travel concept and philosophy in mind, what would that look like?
Well, that's easy because I do actually have a final day in the way I spend it in Paris. Every trip, I tend to always find myself, first of all, every day in Paris, it is waking up and it's going to the boulangerie and it's getting my pastry of the day. So whether it's an almond croissant or pain au chocolat, so I always start my day that way. And I always make my way to one of two of the islands in the middle of the Seine. And the one that I prefer the most is Ile de Saint Louis. And Ile Saint Louis is the smallest of the two islands. The other one is Ile de la Cité, and that is where the Notre Dame Cathedral is. So I love Ile Saint Louis. The reason why is because it's one of the oldest parts of Paris. It's also the one that is probably the one that most aristocrats and most, affluent Parisians live in. It's just such a beautiful, small, quaint, intimate place to kind of walk around. And really, it's one main street and along the Seine on one side and along the Seine on the other side. And really, there's not much to it, but I do love going down that main street and kind of window shopping. There's a couple of stores that I like to go in. There's a cathedral there that probably nobody goes to, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's free to walk in. There's some restaurants that I love to kind of go there and have a long lunch there with a glass of wine. And then I like to just kind of walk up and down the Seine. And sometimes if it's towards the end of the day, I like to grab a block of cheese and a baguette, and I go down to the Seine and, sit along the edge with the locals and just kind of, enjoy the scenery. And it doesn't matter where you are, where you choose to pick yourself along the Seine. It's just beautiful. The architecture and just, watching life kind of pass you by. I also like to walk along it and see the bouquinistes, which are the green stalled book stalls that have been there for centuries and, have ancient books and, new books and like art that you can get from there. So I just kind of like to slowly walk along there. And then I, choose my restaurant in the evening, and that's, to me, my perfect day. And if there's a sunset, then I rush myself back to one of the bridges and I point myself towards the Eiffel Tower and I just watch the sunset and then wait for the sparkle to kind of happen for the Eiffel Tower.
What a beautiful day. Oh my goodness. That sounds like my perfect day as well. So, absolutely, Renee, this was incredible. Thank you so much for not only inspiring us, but also equipping us with the opportunity to think about what slow travel in Paris in particular could look like and how we can incorporate all the tips that you shared for other cities across the country and across the world. So really appreciate your time, Renee.
Thank you, Danielle. This has been an absolute pleasure talking about my favorite city.